When the desert wind quiets and the moon dips behind the mesas, even the dogs stop barking. They say Tuba City sleeps under a sky that remembers everything. And sometimes the land still breathes with what walked here long before us, where the land folds into red mesas and wind hums through sagebrush. A small house still carries stories the locals don't speak aloud. It was early spring, the air cool, dry, and sharp with sand. Karen and her friend, a college student curious about Navajo tradition, had come to stay with Karen's grandmother for 3 quiet days. The house sat alone at the edge of the reservation, surrounded by open land and scattered rural homes that seemed to dissolve into the desert when dusk came. For the first day, everything was peaceful. The rhythm of the res slow, familiar goats in the distance, wind against tin roofs, the faint hum of power lines stretching toward the horizon. Karen's grandmother, a kind but watchful woman in her late 60s, moved through the home with quiet precision, always muttering small blessings under her breath, as if habit. That evening she mentioned something strange. A dog, a black, matted, ugly in a way hard to describe, had wandered onto the property and refused to leave. The narrator remembered it well. The thing had a heavy, uneven gait, too stiff, like it didn't belong in its own skin. Its coat was a dull black, thick and unkempt. It looked like a cross between a shepherd and a lab, but off somehow. The proportions wrong, the eyes too human in the way they seemed to measure you. Karen's grandmother said little more, just that the dog wasn't welcome, and that it should be left alone. That night, the girls settled in the living room to watch a movie. The house was small, a single lamp casting a weak glow, the curtains open to the dark outside. Beyond the glass was only the porch, the parked cars, and the faint reflection of their faces in the window. Karen's grandmother busied herself in the kitchen, the smell of cornmeal and mutton filling the air. The two girls laughed softly, trading jokes about school and life back home. The desert night was still until Karen stood to return a DVD to the shelf near the window. And then she froze. There, pressed against the glass, was that same black dog, its face half lit by the flicker of the television. It stood on top of the old wood box beneath the window, its eyes reflecting white, unblinking, its head tilted slightly, as if studying them. No dog should stand that tall. Not there, not like that. Karen's breath caught. She whispered, "It's that dog." Her grandmother turned from the kitchen at the sound of her voice, but before she could move, Karen flung open the door and shouted into the night. The thing bolted quick, too quick, disappearing into the dark behind the shed. For a while, silence. The kind that presses in after something unnatural moves through it. They tried to shake it off. They left soon after for town to Tuba City to buy groceries and clear their heads. But when they returned near dusk, the dog was gone. The yard felt empty again. Karen's grandmother had gone to visit a friend, leaving the girls alone. As the last light blazed out of the desert sky, a pale moon rose bright, distant, cold. It was just after 5 when they heard it. The doorknob rattling. Softly at first, then harder. Karen frowned, walking to the window. There'd been no sound of a car, no barking from the other dogs. And then she saw it. The dog standing upright on its hind legs, its front paws gripping the brass handle. twisting it, trying to open the door. The narrator said later, it wasn't the act itself that chilled her, it was the look of focus on the animal's face. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. Karen shouted, slamming the door open and chasing it off into the dark again. The thing vanished behind the shed, its movement almost human. When the grandmother returned, they told her everything. She listened in silence, her face unreadable, but her hands trembling slightly as she took off her coat. She said only, "Don't open the door again. Not tonight." That night, the air was brittle. Thin clouds smeared across the moon, and a faint wind rose from the west. They all went to bed early, the two girls in the spare room. Two twin beds, one window curtain drawn half open. For a while, the house was still. Then, faintly at first, came the sound, scratching. A soft tap, tap, tap above them, like claws on wood, followed by a long drag, as if something crawled along the roof. Karen sat up. Her friend whispered, "Did you hear that?" Then the panting started, heavy, wet, close. It circled above them, then shifted with a thud, the sound of weight landing on the large plastic water barrel outside. And then the barking began. But it wasn't right. It wasn't a dog. The voice that came through the wall was deep, broken to human. Woof, 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 ruff. The sound stumbled, as if mocking what barking should sound like. And beneath it, the faint rhythm of breathing. The dogs outside erupted, barking, snarling, but not at the air, at whatever lingered between them and the thing on the roof. Karen's friend whispered, "It's mocking us." They both stared at the window as the sound circled the house, panting, scraping, then stopping right by the glass. The curtain swayed slightly from the draft. And then Karen made the mistake. She reached forward and pulled the curtain aside. For one frozen heartbeat, she saw it, the stray upright again, its face almost pressed to the glass. Its eyes were wrong, too round, too aware. And beneath its jaw, two dark hollows like wounds. Inside them, something moved. A shimmer like eyes. Smaller. Watching. Its paws rested against the window pane, but they weren't paws anymore. They were hands. Twisted, pale, stretched into claws that looked more like fingers than fur. The smell hit next to foul, rotting earth mixed with metal and musk. They screamed. The curtain fell closed. The sound of footsteps, heavy, fast, retreating into the night. Karen's grandmother burst through the door. She didn't ask questions. She ran straight for the fireplace, grabbed a handful of ashes, and crossed herself while whispering a prayer in Navajo. Then she reached under her bed, pulled out an old shotgun, loaded 3 shells, and stormed outside. Her voice rose into the night, shouting words the girls couldn't understand. Then, a single shot echoed across the desert. The barking stopped. Only the wind remained. By morning, the land felt hollow, too quiet, too still. The grandmother said nothing as she brewed coffee, her eyes red from a night without sleep. She told the girls a medicine man would come before sundown. When he arrived, the air changed. He carried cedar and eagle feather and a small pouch of corn pollen. He walked the house in silence, waving smoke through every corner, muttering in low tones that seemed to vibrate through the walls. He said the thing that had come was not a dog, not even alive in the way they understood. It was a Yinalbushi, a skinwalker, something that wears the skin of an animal to hide its human form. He said the stray had been a vessel, its body stolen, used like clothing, so that the thing could move freely. He burned herbs, mixed ash and cedar, and pressed them into small bags for protection. He handed one to the narrator, told her to carry it always. Then he gave her an arrowhead, black and sharp, to wear close to her chest. Before he left, he said quietly, "It won't come back here, but it knows your scent now. Keep your windows closed." That night, the desert wind returned, soft, distant. The dogs barked once, then fell silent, and from far out on the plain, something howled, low, long, almost human. I went to Sedona in late October to hike West Fork Oak Creek after the crowds thinned out. I parked at the call of the Canyon de Use area off Highway 89A, paid at the kiosk, crossed the little footbridge over Oak Creek. A cashier at a small market up the road had warned me that morning not to be in the canyon after dark. "Things call your name there," she said. I smiled, said I'd be back well before sunset. I'd heard the word skinwalker before, but only in stories people tell to fill silence. My plan was simple. Walk a few miles in on trail number 108. Shoot some long exposure photos of leaves in the water, and head out by 4:30. I left my headlamp in the glove box, because I didn't think I'd need it. Cell service dropped to nothing at the trailhead. The first mile went the way everyone says it does. Flat, well-worn path, shallow crossings, cold water that stung my ankles. I passed the old stone remnants of the Mayhew Lodge and kept going as the trail narrowed, the canyon walls boxing in the light. I counted crossings out of habit. It keeps my pace steady, gives me a turnaround point. By the sixth crossing, the shade had a weight to it. That's normal there. On a sandbar, I saw fresh boot prints from earlier hikers, traced beside a line of elk tracks. The odd part, the elk prints pivoted mid-step, not a stumble, just a creaking, as if the animal had turned around without lifting its hooves. I told myself the creek had undercut the edge, distorted the line, and I kept moving. When it happened the first time, I was knee-deep in the water, ankle stepping across. A man said my name from across the creek, in the exact tone my brother uses. Not just the sound, the rhythm, the way he lands on the last syllable, like he's trying to make me laugh. There was no one on the gravel tongue on that side. The sound carried well in there. I told myself it was an echo, that the canyon was bouncing a voice from farther down trail. Still, I slipped my phone into my chest pocket, a habit when something makes me uneasy. I started watching my turnaround time more closely. I hadn't told anyone I was here. My brother was at work, 2 states away. I decided to push another 15 minutes, then head back. To test myself, I scraped a straight line in the damp sand, beside a cottonwood root, with my trekking pole, just a marker for my own nerves. If it looked the same on the way out, I'd feel foolish for worrying. If it didn't, I'd still have a reason to move faster. Without inventing monsters, I hit crossing 8 outbound and turned around at a slow pool that mirrored a red wall. On my way back, the air felt cooler. My fingers were stiff from the water. At first, I heard hikers talking far behind me. Then nothing. At the 11th crossing, I saw it, not a shadow, not a trick of the eye. In the center of my own boot prints, right where the toes pointed back down canyon, someone had stacked 3 smooth creek stones, still wet, balanced on a red leaf. I had walked through there 1 minute earlier. There were no other prints near it. I scanned the undercuts, the brush, and crouched to look beneath a big log that bridged the creek. That's when I saw them. Forearms, bare and long, hands flat on the wet sand, the fingers spread wide, pressing down, like they were testing the ground. The head in the shadow didn't move. It let out a soft sound, a wet whistle. Not words, but the shape of it could have been. Come back. I eased backward into the water without turning my back, then stepped to the opposite bank. I started counting crossings in reverse, out loud, to keep my head straight. 11, 10, 9. The same voice called my name again, but half a beat off, like someone repeating a phrase they'd practiced, but hadn't heard often. I told myself, keep the same pace. No running. Focus on footing. At crossing 8, I checked my pole mark. The straight line I'd drawn had 2 finger-wide trenches dragged across it, in a wide arc, pointing toward me. They were fresh. That's when the base of my neck went tight. That electric, hot feeling that means you're not alone. Coyotes up on the rim started howling, then stopped. Not faded. Stopped. After a single hard crack echoed off the canyon walls. I couldn't place the sound. I kept moving. At a shallow bend, I saw a second stone stack, pressed into my heel print. A leaf folded underneath the smallest rock. It wasn't there before. That's when I understood. It was tracking me, using the same thing I was using, prints and crossings. That's when I understood. It was tracking me, using the same thing I was using, prints and crossings. I broke a thin cottonwood twig, tucked it behind my ear, a marker to know how long I'd been in the water. Once it drooped and fell. The next voice wasn't my brother's. It was my mother's, like she was calling from again. Soft, worried. It said my name from behind me and from ahead of me at the same time. Then, help me. But she doesn't say sweetie the way I heard it. That broke something in me. The part that wanted to answer. I didn't. I just kept walking and started talking to myself to stay anchored. Footbridge, paved path, gate, highway. I repeated them like a prayer. Around a bend, I saw it again. Well up river this time. Not hiding. It moved on elbows and knees across the stones. Without splashing, its shoulders and hips rose and dropped in turns. Not together. The head turned too far, trying to keep me in view. Chin angled over a shoulder in a way that made my stomach pitch. It never spoke while I looked straight at it. The voice only came when I lost sight of it behind rocks or turns. I realized that, and kept my eyes on the water. The twig fell from my ear. I didn't stop to pick it up. Light drains fast in there near the end of the day. Shadows stretched long and cold. The creek deepened to mid-thigh, and I pushed through, teeth clicking from the chill. Then, a thin band of brighter sky, where West Fork meets Oak Creek. The footbridge was close, on the gravel tongue at the confluence. A shape rose ahead of me on all fours, then half stood, then dropped again. It didn't make a sound. It turned its head too far, and I understood. I didn't need to see its face to know I shouldn't be there. I ran, boots slapping the wood bridge, up the paved path, past the signs, through the gate. The road came into view, gray and real and full of rules I understood. A silver SUV passed northbound, and I was already waving, shouting. The driver braked hard when he saw me. I yanked at the back door handle, said, "Please, someone's following me." The woman in the passenger seat looked past me and grabbed her husband's arm. We all watched the end of the path together, at the edge of the headlights, just outside the beam. Something stood where gravel met the shoulder. It didn't move, just shifted its weight, then stilled. You can tell when a person doesn't want their face in light. That's the closest I can explain it. They told me to get in. We drove fast. Nothing followed us up 89A. No movement along the shoulder. My hands shook so badly, I dropped my phone twice. When I could talk, I asked them to take me back to the trailhead parking lot. A deputy from Coconino County met me there. He took my statement, told me to return the next day to check for damage. He offered to drive the loop with his lights on. I said yes. That night, I didn't sleep. The next afternoon, we walked to my car together. He found smears on the rear quarter panel. Handprints, made of red sediment, dragged downward, too low for an adult standing upright. He rubbed one, and it stained his thumb. He took photos. Didn't say much else. Only later did I check my phone. The voice memo app had recorded 5 minutes by accident. Mostly water and my breath. And twice, in that mess, someone calls my mother's name. Not mine. Hers. She was at home. In another state. I didn't send her the audio. I nailed it to myself and printed the 911 log. If you're looking for the part where it comes to my house, that chapter isn't here. If you want proof, you'll get what I have. The call log, the incident number, photos of the crossings in daylight. The rest is the part you'll have to believe or not. If you go there, turn around earlier than you think. Count your crossings. Stay out of the sand. If something starts marking your prints, and if the canyon gets personal, if someone you love starts calling your name from 2 directions at once, don't answer. Walk the creek until you see the bridge. Keep your eyes on the water and the way out. I did, and nothing followed me onto the highway. That's the only reason. I'm the one telling this story. Should have trusted my gut the moment I stepped into that house. It wasn't just the damp smell that hit me like a slap. Mold, old wood, and something faintly metallic, like pennies left out in the rain. It wasn't even the dim lighting that turned every corner into a shadowy void. No, it was the feeling, that heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on me as soon as I crossed the threshold, like the house was watching me. The woman who owned the place, Sister Wilcox, waddled ahead of us, her wide frame brushing against the walls as she led us to our room. She didn't say much, just muttered something about us making do. Her voice was thin and raspy, like the air in the house. When she opened the door to our room, I had to bite back a grimace. Room was generous. It was more like a showbox someone had lined with cheap paneling and called livable. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow light. Two twin beds crammed together with barely enough space to walk between them, and a closet that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. "This will do," she said, more to herself than to us. Her small, watery eyes flitted over me, lingered for a beat too long, then turned to my companion, Elder Russo. "Dinner's at 6," she added before lumbering off, her footsteps heavy on the creaky floorboards. "Cozy," Russo muttered, tossing his bag onto one of the beds. His Italian accent made everything sound less sarcastic than it probably was. I tried to shake off the unease as I unpacked, telling myself this was temporary, just a few days, until the mission office found us another place. But the feeling lingered, a nagging itch I couldn't scratch. The first night, I couldn't sleep. Russo snored softly on the bed next to mine, his steady breathing the only sound in the room. But something kept me awake. Maybe it was the faint creak of the house settling, or the way the shadows in the corner seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I stared at the closet door, its faded wood grain catching the light in strange patterns. I don't know how long I lay there, but at some point I must have dozed off. I woke up to the sound of my name. "David." It was a whisper, soft but distinct. My eyes snapped open and my heart hammered in my chest. I glanced at Russo, who was still snoring, then at the closet. The door was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before. "David," it came again, this time louder, more insistent. My skin prickled and my mouth went dry. I told myself it had to be my imagination, a leftover thread from a half-remembered dream. But the voice didn't sound like something conjured by my subconscious. It sounded real, close, like someone standing just behind the closet door. I sat up, my movements slow and deliberate, and stared at the crack of darkness inside the closet. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. "Russo," I whispered. No response. I reached over and shook his shoulder, but he just grunted and rolled over. The voice didn't come again that night, but I didn't sleep. I sat there wide-eyed, watching the closet, until the first light of dawn seeped through the window. The next day I tried to convince myself it was nothing stress, fatigue. But when Russo asked why I looked like I hadn't slept, I couldn't bring myself to tell him. What would I even say? That I thought the closet was whispering to me. We spent most of the day out on our bikes, visiting houses, knocking on doors. By the time we got back, I was bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that made your legs feel like lead. But as soon as we stepped into that house, the unease came rushing back. Dinner was the same bland casserole as the night before, served with Sister Wilcox's unsettling stare. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was always something strange, cryptic comments about how houses have memories and some rooms are better left shut. That night I made sure the closet door was shut tight before I climbed into bed. I even jammed a chair against it, just to be safe. Russo teased me for it, but I didn't care. "You'll thank me when the boogeyman doesn't get us," I said, forcing a laugh. But the laugh died in my throat when I woke up in the middle of the night to find the chair moved and the closet door wide open. The voice was back, clearer this time. "David, come here." My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight, a sense of command that made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream, to wake Russo, but I couldn't move. It was like something had pinned me to the bed. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at the open door, the darkness inside seeming deeper than it should have been, like it wasn't just shadows, but something alive watching me. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed. When I finally managed to move, I didn't dare look inside the closet. I just reached over and shook Russo awake. "We're switching beds," I blurted. "What? Why?" He grumbled, groggy and annoyed. "Just trust me." He didn't argue, and I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. By the third night, I was ready to leave. Rules be damned. But Russo convinced me to stick it out a few more days. "We can handle a few more days," he said. That was the night I woke up to find the scratches, 3 long parallel lines across my abdomen. They didn't bleed, but they burned like fire. I stumbled to the bathroom, my hands shaking as I stared at them in the mirror. They were too precise, too clean. Not something I could have done to myself. When I asked Sister Wilcox the next morning if she had any pets, her response sent a chill through me. "No pets," she said, smiling faintly. "But you know this house is haunted, don't you?" She didn't wait for my reply. She just shuffled off, humming to herself, leaving me alone with the knowing realization that whatever was in this house wasn't done with me yet. The reservation felt like another planet. The air was thinner, drier, and the emptiness stretched forever. Rusted-out cars littered yards like forgotten relics, and the wind carried a faint metallic tang that didn't belong to the desert. My new companion, Elder Ramirez, was the quiet type. He was polite enough, but you could tell he'd seen some things in his 5 months here, the kind of things he didn't want to talk about. "We stick to the rules here," he told me the first day. "No staying out past sundown. No shortcuts through the back roads. And if something feels wrong, we leave. No questions." It sounded dramatic, but I didn't argue. There was something about the way he said it, like he wasn't quoting the mission handbook but speaking from experience. Out here, the rules felt less like guidelines and more like survival instincts. It was a Thursday evening, and we were driving back from Superior, the sun bleeding red into the horizon. Ramirez was at the wheel, humming a hymn under his breath while I stared out the window, watching the shadows grow long and sharp across the desert. We were supposed to be back before dark, but the appointment had run late. Now the road ahead was cloaked in twilight, and the silence between us felt heavier with each passing mile. I was about to say something, maybe crack a joke to lighten the mood, when Ramirez slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, and I lurched forward, my seat belt digging into my chest. "What the hell?" I barked, clutching the dashboard. Ramirez didn't answer. He was staring at something in the road ahead, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were white. I followed his gaze and froze. A dog, at least I think it was a dog, stood in the middle of the highway. Its fur was patchy, hanging in clumps like it had been pulled off in strips. Its ribs jutted out sharply, and its head hung low, almost too low, as if its neck couldn't support the weight. Its eyes, though, those weren't the eyes of an animal. They were dark and glassy, and they locked onto me, like it knew I was watching. "Speed up," Ramirez said, his voice low and urgent. "What, speed up?" he snapped, slamming his foot on the gas. The engine roared, and the truck lurched forward. I stared at him in disbelief. "You're going to hit it." "Shut up," he hissed. "Don't look at it, just don't look." But I did. I couldn't help it. As we barreled toward the thing, I turned to look, and for a split second it looked back. The face staring at me wasn't a dog's. It wasn't even human. The skin was stretched too tight, the features twisted into something grotesque, like it was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. And it smiled, its lips pulled back to reveal jagged yellow teeth, and I swear I heard it laugh. A low, guttural sound that cut through the roar of the engine. I snapped my head forward, my heart hammering. The truck jolted as we sped past, and when I looked in the side mirror, the thing was gone. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Ramirez didn't answer. He was breathing hard, his eyes fixed on the road. "Don't talk about it," he finally said. "Don't even think about it." That night, back at the apartment, I couldn't shake the image. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face staring at me, its dark eyes boring into mine. Ramirez barely said a word as we ate dinner, and when the sun dipped below the horizon, he locked every door and window in the place. It seemed excessive, but I didn't argue. Not after what I'd seen. It was around 11 p.m. when the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a faint tap, tap, tap on the front door. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Ramirez's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Don't answer it," he whispered. "What if it's the district leader?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not." The knocking grew louder, more insistent. My skin prickled. I moved toward the door, but Ramirez grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't." I shrugged him off. You're being ridiculous. It's probably just. He cut me off with a desperate look. If you open that door, we're dead. Something in his tone stopped me cold. The knocking continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like whoever or whatever was on the other side knew we were listening. And then I heard it. Elder, a voice called softly. It sounded like our district leader, but something about it was wrong. The tone was off, too flat, like it was reading from a script. Elder Ramirez. Elder Johnson. It's me. Open the door. My blood ran cold. Ramirez pulled out his phone and dialed, his hands shaking. After a few tense seconds, someone picked up. Where are you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In bed, came the groggy reply. Why? Send me a picture, Ramirez demanded. Now. I heard the muffled sound of confusion on the other end, followed by the ding of a text. Ramirez showed me the screen, a photo of our district leader and his companion, time-stamped just a minute earlier. They were in their apartment, 2 hours away. The knocking stopped. I let out a shaky breath, but Ramirez's grip on my arm tightened. It's not over, he whispered. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. It pressed against my ears, thick and unnatural. And then faintly, I heard it a breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. Just outside the window. I turned slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. The blinds rattled softly, as if something was brushing against them. Ramirez motioned for me to stay put as he moved toward the window. He peeked through the edge of the blinds and went rigid. His face drained of color, and he stumbled back, his hand clutching the cross around his neck. What did you see? I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer. He just turned to me with a look I'll never forget, pure, unfiltered terror. We didn't sleep that night. We just sat there, backs against the wall, clutching whatever we could find that felt even remotely like a weapon. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional shuffle of footsteps outside. And when the sun finally rose, we found the footprints large, clawed, and muddy. They led from the front door to the window, then stopped abruptly, as if whatever had been there had vanished into thin air. But I knew it hadn't, not really. We didn't talk about what happened that night, not at first. Ramirez wouldn't look me in the eye, and I wasn't about to press him. I wasn't even sure I wanted answers. Every instinct I had screamed to forget it, pretend none of it had happened. But how do you ignore muddy claw marks that disappear into nowhere? We didn't talk about what happened that night, not at first. Ramirez wouldn't look me in the eye, and I wasn't about to press him. I wasn't even sure I wanted answers. Every instinct I had screamed to forget it, pretend none of it had happened. But how do you ignore muddy claw marks that disappear into nowhere? Ramirez gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles bone white, while I kept my eyes on the horizon, avoiding my own reflection in the passenger side mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was watching us, just out of sight. The meeting started like any other Velders talking shop, exchanging stories about rejections and the occasional rare success. But when it came to my turn to share, I hesitated. The words were caught in my throat like barbed wire. Russo stayed silent, but I could feel his eyes on me, daring me to say something. Finally I muttered, "We had some disturbances. Knocking. Weird noises." The room went quiet to quiet. Everyone else exchanged uneasy glances, and the air grew heavy, almost stifling. Elder Hutch, one of the district leaders, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Disturbances?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with something sharp. "What kind of disturbances?" I swallowed hard and tried to keep my tone light. "You know, just strange knocking. A voice outside the door. Probably just some kids messing with us." Hutch didn't laugh. His face darkened, and he exchanged a look with his companion before nodding slowly. You saw something, didn't you?" His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. I hesitated, but Ramirez stepped in. "We don't need to get into it," he said quickly. "It's handled." "No, it's not," Hutch snapped, his composure slipping for a moment. "You think this is a joke. You think this is something you can just ignore." The tension in the room was unbearable. Finally Hutch leaned back and sighed. "You've heard of Skinwalkers, right?" What followed was a crash course in nightmares. Hutch explained the legend in hushed tones, his voice steady but his hands trembling. "Skinwalkers," he said, "were dark spirits, shapeshifters, born of unspeakable acts of murder, betrayal. They wore the skins of animals, mimicked human voices, and thrived on fear. According to local lore, making eye contact or acknowledging them gave them power over you, marked you in some way. They don't stop," Hutch said, his eyes fixed on me. "Once they notice you, they keep coming. Unless you figure out how to break their hold." My stomach churned. The thing on the road. The knocking. The voice outside our door. Had I looked too long? Listened too closely? I wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't come. That night I was restless. Ramirez tried to reassure me, mumbling prayers under his breath as he sprinkled the apartment with salt and holy water. It seemed desperate, almost futile. But I didn't stop him. Any comfort, no matter how small, was better than none. Around midnight, the air in the apartment changed. It felt heavier, colder, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Ramirez and I exchanged a look, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Then the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a faint tap, 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 but it grew louder, sharper, until the entire door frame rattled. This time there was no mistaking the malice behind it. The sound was angry, purposeful, like whatever was out there was trying to break through. Ramirez grabbed a Bible and stood near the door, muttering rapid prayers. I stayed back, clutching the pocket knife I'd brought from California. It felt laughably inadequate, but it was all I had. The knocking stopped suddenly, and for a moment the silence was worse. Then came the voice. "Elder Ramirez. Elder Johnson. Let me in." It sounded like Hutch, perfectly, unmistakably Hutch, but it wasn't him. The voice was wrong. Flat. Hollow. like it was coming from a broken speaker. Ramirez shook his head, his lips moving silently in prayer. Then came the scratching, long, deliberate strokes, like claws dragging across wood. The sound was unbearable, setting my teeth on edge. My heart pounded as I stared at the door, waiting for it to give way, but it didn't. Somehow, it held. The scratching stopped, and for a moment I thought it was over. Then I felt it, the cold hand brushed against the back of my neck. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, just Ramirez, wide-eyed and pale, clutching his cross like a lifeline. The next morning, the claw marks were there, deep gouges in the wood, too precise and on purpose to be anything natural. We reported it to the mission office, but they dismissed it as a prank. We knew better. Whatever it wasn't done with me. Driving to our next assignment, the unease followed me like a shadow. I caught glimpses of something in the mirrors, a figure, distorted and animalistic, always just out of focus. I didn't tell Ramirez. I couldn't, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever had marked me back on that highway wasn't going to let go. I never told anyone the full story. Not until now. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see it. That grin. Those eyes. And at night, when the wind picks up, and the coyotes start howling, I swear I can still hear it. That voice, whispering my name. The stories tonight all share a thread of something ancient, something that refuses to fade into the background of time. Across the quiet deserts, the wind-carved mesas, and the long stretches of lonely highway, the legend of the Skinwalker endures. From frightened families on the edge of the reservation, to travelers who swear they saw something impossible in the headlights. These encounters remind us that there are things older than fear itself, watching from the dark. Each story, unique in its terror, echoes the same truth whispered across generations, that the line between the natural and the supernatural is thinner than we want to believe. And maybe, just maybe, some doors, once opened, should never be looked through again.